Hello, everyone. Hello, Facebook world. Hello, YouTube. Hello, internet in general. Welcome to a day in the life where I catch up with people on work, life, and anything else. Today's guest is Dan Carroll, a project manager and media engagement director. And just as a quick intro about Dan and how I met, it was when I was a graduate student and I just didn't have a lot of money, but I wanted to go to this anime convention in Atlanta called MomoCon, and I decided to volunteer. And Dan here graciously let me join his media relations team for not only MomoCon, but also DragonCon, which is Atlanta's largest sci-fi and fantasy convention. Dan has been a great mentor and supporter. So welcome, Dan. The first part I want to talk about is just kind of like more about work, and then we'll talk a little bit more about your life. But with you, Dan, work is kind of like you have two lives that you're living. You have your life as the media engagement director for all these conventions, but then you have your day job as a project manager. And so maybe let's talk a little bit about project management first. And I definitely noticed when I volunteered with you, I could definitely tell how you use those project management skills to run our team, but maybe you could just talk a little bit about your career path, what got you into it.
Sure. And it was a convoluted trail I took. First off, thank you for having me on the show today. But it was a convoluted trail. I was a Soviet analyst in the Navy and a Russian translator. And my plan was to go for a PhD in Soviet studies. And I was all set to spend a year in Siberia, in Sibirsk, which is a town out there. And the Soviet Union collapsed. The money disappeared. My opportunities went out the window. And I had some computer skills, so I got myself into computers. Eventually, within a couple of years, I was in HTML. Back then, we called the role HTML author. It was not even a developer. Went from there into learning SQL and back-end development and the full life cycle software arrangement. I was a Microsoft developer using a language called ASP. And around the end of the dot-com bust, I had an opportunity to get a job as a documentation manager. So it was my first time with manager in my role. And my job was to deliver a $75 million data center design with 17 different departments working together, working against each other in some ways. And I learned that I enjoyed organizing stuff. And I got a corporate award for organizational excellence, which for those people who knew me in my day-to-day life found it very funny because I am kind of a scatterbrained. But it's that ADD situation in my life that made me hyper organized. And I went and took a test called the Project Management Professional, or PMP, highly coveted management exam and certification. Got the certification. Actually, I got it. I just found out I got it 16 years ago this month. Oh, wow. Because I'm due for renewal. That's how I know. So I'm getting it renewed, and I've been working project management ever since. Primarily, I work in the IT field with an emphasis on software delivery, but I've also frequently worked with infrastructure and data centers. And I've done everything from straight up making sure software gets delivered on time and on budget to working a 24-hour data center build for a major airline here in Atlanta. And if you know Atlanta, you know which major airline it is. And that was a fascinating job because there was not a lot of project management involved, but there was a whole lot of diplomacy involved, because if anything went wrong and I did get called in, it normally involved escalating up to a very high level within the organization. So, project management is 50% organization and 50% diplomacy. I find is kind of a true statement. And for those of you who don't know, A project is a set of goals that are delivered within a certain timeline. So it's a very specific endeavor to create a result within a set timeline and a set budget. So that's what I do. I manage scope, budget, and timeline.
Yeah, and that applies really well to, it sounds like your role as the media engagement director. So how'd you get into that?
Well, in 2006, a friend of mine passed away suddenly, and it was somebody I hadn't seen for a long time, and we reconnected. And within a month of reconnecting, she was gone. And it really made me evaluate how I spend my life, and am I doing what I need to be doing? It also came at a time when my children were leaving to go to the Navy, leaving to go to college, and I was finding myself an empty nester. What I did was look at Dragon Con, and as I said, I had children in college, so I had to worry about budget. And I found out for a mere $20 for the rest of my life, I could volunteer. And I volunteered to work guest services, which I assumed was helping people find the bathroom and find where they're going. But no, as you know, guest in the Dragon Con world means the celebrities. And they told me I couldn't do that without them knowing who I was. And they recommended information services. So for 3 years, I did indeed tell people where to find the bathroom.
Yeah.
And the opportunity came up for a position that was at that time called press liaison. And apart from the fact that liaison is a word that most people have to stop before they pronounce it if they want to pronounce it properly, it's also hard to spell. So once I went through my 3 months, now this is a volunteer position. I'm a volunteer at Dragon Con, project management I get paid for. Dragon Con is an act of love. And but it still took me 3 months to get through the interview process. And when they picked me, I said, well, the first thing I want to do is change that to media relations and not press liaison. So that's how I ended up as the media relations director. And recently, as you're aware, I was promoted in charge of all of media relations. And I was, but my primary responsibility is to focus on that spokesperson role, as opposed to the administrative side of the house.
Mm-hmm. That seems really well suited for you too, and a lot probably more fun, I imagine.
It is more fun. Now, don't get me wrong, I loved everything else, but as the event has grown, we didn't know each other when I started, but the year before I took over, we had 29,000 attendees at Dragon Con. And now we have, this year's a little bit different because of COVID. We are having an attendance cap. But the last time we had an in-person Dragon Con, it was 85,000. In 2020, we were expecting 90,000 people. Mm-hmm. That's a 3-time growth in 11 years.
Yeah, for those of you who don't live in Atlanta, that convention over Labor Day weekend just takes over the city. The downtown area is just completely filled with people cosplaying and going to Dragon Con. It's a lot of fun and a lot of great energy.
The biggest complaint we have from people out of state is finding a hotel room.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember being there one time on the Thursday night at we were at the bar, I think meeting where we were doing our press tour, and somebody was there for, I don't know, for some reason, and he was just so confused, what's going on?
Absolutely. And I have friends who've worked across the street, and the first time you encounter it, it's like nothing else you've ever seen. But then they got used to it, and they waited for it every year. Even though they weren't attending, they enjoyed seeing the costumes and the excitement on the street.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of energy and a lot of fun. Yeah,
I like it.
Yeah. I did want to kind of circle back to what you said about how you were initially gonna, I'm curious to know more about your, well, I saw on your LinkedIn that you'd learned Russian. And so that was a question I was gonna ask you anyway. And then you kind of mentioned, oh, I was gonna go work in the Soviet Union. And so I'd love to hear more about that. That sounds really interesting.
Sure. I found myself needing a job and needing to finish college and absolutely needing to get out of New Jersey where I grew up. And my options were, I don't know, I guess I could have had more, but I remember the words my father said: if you ever need to join the military, join the Navy, because they dropped him off at Normandy and then left and went back to America. And it's not that simple. It's just an Army guy's definition of the Navy.
Mhm.
So I went to talk to my Navy recruiter because my plan was to become a journalist, which is they run the Navy television, film departments, and also their radio stations and their newspapers. And I thought that would be a lot of fun. I've always been a communications oriented guy, even when I was young. So I took the test to get in the Navy, and they told me I did too good to be a journalist. And they said, we want you to be a nuclear engineer.
Oh.
And I said, I don't want to be that.
No.
What else you got? And they said, well, if you take this test, you might be able to go to Monterey, California to live a year on the top of Monterey Hill, overlooking the bay and learning a foreign language. And I said, that sounds great.
Yeah.
And I thought I could learn Chinese, I could learn German, I could learn Japanese, and Japanese and German were the two on my mind. And I took the test and they came back and said, fantastic, you can learn Arabic or Russian. And I was very familiar with the 19th century Russian writers. I'd grown up very politically involved. I was well aware who Solzhenitsyn was. And I kind of thought Tolstoy, Pushkin, Dostoevsky, Solzhenitsyn. And I was not that familiar with Arabic literature. And I chose Russian. And a couple months later, I was at boot camp, got out of boot camp. They sent me to Monterey, 6 hours a day, 3 hours a day of homework for 47 weeks.
Oh, wow.
It's a grueling curriculum. It's all unclassified. There's nothing classified about it. And then they shipped me off to a couple other schools, which are completely classified. I won't even mention what state they're in. And then they sent me to live on the beaches of Spain for 3 years. And every so often I'd get on a ship and sail through the Middle East and then come back. And I finished almost all my degree. I just had 6 credits left and got out of the Navy, finished my 6 credits. And just as I was all set to go, I had been the Russian translator for the president of the university I was taking my last 6 credits at. And they had selected me for this scholarship to go and study in Sverdlovsk. That's the name of the city in Siberia, Sverdlovsk. And the Soviet Union collapsed and the money went away, and Soviet PhDs became depression level. And they went to 50% unemployment within 6 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And since I didn't have any known business acumen at that point, I decided to get into computers. And that's how I got into computers. But my son decided he also wanted to be a cryptologist, which was what my rating was in the Navy. And he joined the Navy expecting to learn Chinese, only to find out he did not have a guarantee. He didn't get to choose before he went in. And he took Russian. A year and a half, 2 years later, he met his current wife, who is Ukrainian. So now, because of my Russian education, I can talk to my granddaughter.
That's great. It all comes back.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's all certain.
Yeah. So I'd love to know a little more about just like what a day in the life is like for you.
Well, I'm a contract consultant, and I have been most of my career. Because it's project based, it's been very good for me. It allows me to take shorter term contracts or longer term contracts. So my day, ever since COVID, my day begins with my alarm going off. I take about an hour a day to do non non-work related stuff, whether it's playing a video game, catching up on Loki or some other show. And the other thing that's really weird about my life post-COVID is I hardly watch TV, where before COVID, I was an avid TV watcher.
Mhm.
Now it's Bob's Burgers, whatever new show is on Disney. I'm finally catching up with Bad Batch. And then also that's when I do my Dragon Con work, is before 8:30, because I have a commitment that I will always get emails returned within 8 hours, 8 business hours. So if you send me an email at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you'll get a response before noon the next day. If you send it to me in the morning, you'll get it before I go to bed that night. So and I have to be aware that even though Dragon Con is a finite event that takes place every Labor Day weekend, Dragon Con preparedness and planning takes place year round, and people have questions year round.
Right.
Oh, you want to hear when I go to? So here's another thing. I don't drink coffee in the morning.
Mhm.
A lot of people drink coffee in the morning. I do not. And then I hit my work. What I try to do work-wise is, first thing I do is obviously check my email from the night before. I work for a company that has offices, and I have business partners and technical resources that are all over the United States. So they could be working California time, they could be working East Coast time, they could be working somewhere in the middle. So where I'll log out at 5 and I try to keep a hard stop when I log out, because I'm a contractor. I need to work no more than 40 hours a week. So I try not to get too heavily involved in email or Teams. Then I have every day, because I'm a project manager, I have a handful of meetings during the day. And one of the things that's interesting about being a project manager is that I don't have just one project.
Mhm.
I've got at any given point, I have, in my current position, for instance, I have a risk management project that's going through to February, and I've also got an HR project that's completing in September. So each one of those projects are going to have different meetings during the day. Plus, I'm responsible for paperwork, answering emails, and what I like to do, especially make sure I'm focused with the way things are in this structure, is I make sure I have a half hour to prepare for each of the meetings. And they don't have to be immediately before the meetings. I could take an hour to prepare for 2 meetings that are back to back. And then I try to take a 4-minute meditation before each meeting.
Oh yeah.
Because what's most important for me, where I think I'm contributing, is where I am showing leadership and I'm showing confidence, but also taking care of what has to be done. But more importantly, is I've got to show focus, and I am too patient with people I work with. If they get lost or they get confused, or they're just like, where am I? Or they've been multitasking during a call. But the problem is I'm also pretty patient with myself. So I have to go the other way and make sure that I'm exuding that confidence, and I'm building their confidence. So like I said, it's 50% organization, but it's also a lot of confidence building and team building that's involved.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And it's really interesting that you've done contract work for so much. Like I guess I get reached out to a lot by recruiters on LinkedIn, and it's usually for contract work. And I'm always kind of like, it sounds interesting, but I guess it's just like I went straight into full-time positions. And so I'm interested on your take on what you like and don't like
Yeah.
about it.
Excellent. Well, so originally when I started doing this, I had been I taught myself HTML, and I had come from a sales background. And then I realized that, um, without any arrogance, I'm really good at building connections. This is not any, I mean, you can back me up on this. But I was really bad at asking for money, which makes me a really bad salesperson. If everybody when I was in my 20s hadn't said, you should go into sales, you're really good at talking to people, and it stopped and said, hey, you should go into marketing, you're really good at understanding
Mm,
what makes people excited, I would have had a completely different career, because
yeah.
I never would have gone straight into, uh, I was very good in support, um, but I had to teach myself development. So uh, my first professional gig with IBM. I don't know why I didn't say Delta, but I said IBM. But so it was with IBM. It was converting the old IBM Red books, which was the standard IBM documentation tools.
Mhm.
I was converting them to HTML, and I was actually the person who understood HTML better than anybody else, because I had been teaching myself for a year. I had some clients, um, but that was a contract position, and I'm glad I took it because it was right before the Olympics, and soon nobody was hiring anybody in any way, shape, or form because the Olympics came to town, which tells you it was 96. So I took that contract, and it was like a 4-month contract. It went to 6 months. It took me to the Olympics. And right before the Olympics started, that contract ended, and I got a phone call from a recruiter who wanted me to go to a place called Omaha, which is somewhere in the middle of America, according to Adam Duritz of Counting Crows. And I didn't know anything about Omaha except that it was a punchline and jokes and the Counting Crows song, Omaha. So and this is a long time ago, but they offered me a rate of, can I talk money? It's been 20 years. So they
Yeah,
offered me a
yeah.
rate of 28, which was about what I was making in Atlanta. And I said, that's great. And that's comparable to what I'm making, but I don't want to go to Omaha. And that was Monday evening. And Tuesday evening, they called me again and said, look, we want you to, we really like you. They like your resume. And I'm like, why did they see their resume? But I'm not going to ask about that. But he's like, I really, really think you'd be good for this. And I say, no. And Wednesday he calls me, and he starts off with, what would it take for you to go? And as I said, 28 was the original offer. I came back with 38, which I thought was, at the time, that was high. That was high for what I was doing. It was also ridiculous money compared to what I'd been making. And I thought that would get rid of him. And he called me back Tuesday morning and said, I've got you an interview tomorrow at noon at 38 an hour. And I'm like, oh my God, now. And I had the interview. It is a good story. I don't know if it necessarily answers your question, but I'll make sure I answer your question before I'm done. And I have the interview at noon. It lasts 18 minutes. And I'm like, okay, well, now it's not even a factor because this guy just hated me. And in Omaha, he hung up the phone, got up out of his desk, went to his boss's office and goes, we found our front end developer. And, with you doing UX and everything, you cannot imagine how bad my skills were by today's standards to be the front end developer. And it was just not great at all, but it was better than anything else because they didn't have anybody else who even knew HTML applying. And I loved Omaha, loved the position. They taught me SQL. They approved my initial front-end design for an e-commerce solution for a company called Intercom that was I think at the time, the #1 distributor of Microsoft products to corporate America and a bunch of other stuff. They were riding high. They were a great company, and they wanted me to stay, and I missed my ATL too much, so I came back. But afterwards, I found that I could actually increase my earnings by agreeing to take 3-month contracts and then stay for 18 months or 2 years. But because it was offered as a 3-month contract, it was usually $5 an hour more. But when I got extended, I still got the same rate or raises. You know, I had a number of really good contracts. I never, seldom felt I got betrayed at the end of a contract. I never felt that I was let go without warning. I usually, because of the work ethic I had, I would normally come in early or towards the beginning and then watch everybody else leave, and I would be the guy left behind, because I had also, as a contractor, normally was a translator, especially when we had international folks working with us, people from India, Pakistan. I often translated the requirements to technological conversation, but not just, but I also did that with Native English speakers from America, because I had that skill of understanding the plain language that business had, but I also understood the technological language, and ended up doing a lot of that cross conversion. And a couple of times I took straight up technical writing gigs just as a break from development. And that was what I was doing when I discovered project management.
Yeah, that's a really valuable skill to have, is being able to speak the technical and the business speak. It's very important. Yeah.
And that was part of my branding. As a consultant, I would go into interviews and say, well, let me explain. You will find better developers and you will find better consultants. What you're not going to find is somebody who's going to live at that crossroads between technology and communications. And if that's what you need, I'm your guy.
Yeah.
And, you know, it worked. And I know I took jobs from people who were much better technical developers than I was, but that's not what I was offering. What I was, and I think this is one thing for everybody out there listening: know what you're good at.
Yeah. And
don't be afraid to say, this is what I'm good at. And sometimes it means minimizing the stuff you're bad at. But just that, you know, that one thing of knowing who I was and be able to go into an interview with them. When I walked out, they knew who I was. And when I showed up for the job, I was the guy I said I was. Mm-hmm. And when I needed a reference, they said, that's the guy who told us what he was, and he showed up and did it. Let's go ahead and tell him that he's good. So that's one of the benefits as a professional.
I think that's really great advice, because I mean, it's especially like when you're just starting out, it's really hard to just pinpoint what you're good at. And over time, like really just sticking hard on what you're good at. And I think, yeah, that's a really great, just to be like upfront and honest, and people respect that.
Sure. And you don't get it automatically. I mean, I got, in my case, you know, I knew I was, even when I was in a naval department filled with communicators who were polyglots, I was the guy who the senior chief pulled to write all the recommendations, because he knew I was good with words. And obviously, like, if I say I'm good with words, my entire career backs me up on that. I've got documentation. But I know, you know, there's the irony is I'm a bad typist. So balances out.
Balances out. Yeah, well, we've spent a ton of time talking about work, so let's get into more like kind of life and fun stuff. I you know, I don't remember if we've ever talked about this, but you mentioned a few of them. But like, what are your fandoms? What are you into?
Oh, okay. Well, I used to, my big fandom, the one that got me to Dragon Con, was Stargate and Dead Like Me. In fact, I just started rewatching Dead Like Me. Do you remember Dead Like Me?
I never saw it.
It was about a young girl who was killed by a toilet seat that fell off the space station. And when she died, she found out she was not going on to the next life. She was going to be a Grim Reaper. Um, a very Brian Fuller show. So a lot like Wonder Falls in terms of its insanity and fun. And that was what got me to DragonCon. Was Ellen Muth was coming to DragonCon.
Mm-hmm.
And then actually, when I got there, I was so excited to meet Billy West that at one point I was waiting online to see Billy West, and I felt a pair of eyes on me, and it was Ellen Muth from Dead Like Me staring at me, and I just turned around and said hi, and I think she wanted me to buy an autograph, but my funds were limited. And so I love Stargate, Stargate Atlantis. I got my theories about season 1 of Stargate Atlantis, but that's beside the point. Was not a giant Stargate SGU fan, but Marvel comics from a very early age. I got comics banned in my school. I got comics banned in my house. I was forced to sell all my comics, including 3 copies of Giant Size X-Men #1, which are now going for what, $110,000 a piece, and I sold them for a quarter, 10 cents a piece.
That's so sad.
At my father's insistence. But a big reader. I've always been a big reader. During the 90s, even when I wasn't involved in any other fandom, I would read 14 Isaac Asimov stories beginning in May and ending in September every year. I called it the read. And so big Dune fan. Saddest moment in my life in a movie theater was watching the movie Dune on screen and having my childhood ripped out and shattered and thrown on the floor. Not a fan of the movie Dune,
Clearly,
I'll tell you that.
Clearly.
And then I saw Phantom Menace, so I cried again at the movie. So twice in my life I cried because they broke my heart. But I love original Star Wars, the first trilogy. I love the cartoons. Kind of look like one of the guys from one of the cartoons. Love now the past few years, since the pandemic, I have been obsessed with the work of Brandon Sanderson. Man, I once said, "Oh, I'm not going to read his books because he's so nice. He's got to be a bad writer," because he was just one of the most delightful human beings I've ever met at a convention. And I recently had the opportunity to tell him that after I explained that I had listened to over, I had probably listened to over 400 hours of Brandon Sanderson during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
He's that good. So Stormlight Archives, folks. And also, I just got into something I should have gotten into years ago, which is Wheel of Time.
Oh, yeah.
I just started reading that, and somebody reminded me after I started that it's good because I'll be ready for the TV show. And I'm like, what TV show?
Oh,
Completely forgot about the TV show. Right, have you read Wheel of Time?
I haven't. My dad read them. I remember him reading them, but I never read them. But I didn't know there was a TV show. That's cool.
Yeah. So what other, I'm trying to think what other interesting fandoms I have. Obviously, if you're my Facebook friend, you're aware I have the weirdest taste in music. A few years back, I went to see 4 concerts. I went to see Southside Johnny and the Asbury Jukes, which were a frequent opening band for Bruce Springsteen. So it's an old Springsteen-like band. Went to go see Bowling for Soup, who I consider the funniest band. I actually find them as funny as Weird Al. And saw the Jim Blossoms, and I'm lying, I saw 5 shows. And then I watched She Wants Revenge because I also have a goth part of my soul, a little bit of darkness in there, and Allie and AJ because I love bubblegum music. So
Quite the mix.
quite the mix.
Yeah. Well, talking about those celebrity sightings at your first Dragon Con, would love to know kind of maybe your most out there story of experience at Dragon Con, either with a celebrity or just with the with the people there.
I once got in a fight with reporters from Vice.com who had tried to kidnap Carrie Fisher.
Uh, why?
I think that
I
that's
remember
a big
hearing
one.
about that. Yeah, like, oh, I mean, I guess I
It's
could see
big.
why you'd
I
want
don't,
to kidnap Carrie Fisher, but geez, like, what were they trying to do? Like, take her into a room somewhere?
they had surrounded her backstage and would not let her leave until she agreed to an interview. And Carrie Fisher, God bless her, you're aware she was very mentally ill, and she had dealt with many, many bad things in her career and was perfectly fine just telling them they're idiots
Yeah, good.
and asking why they thought anything they were doing had any value. It was, I, on the other hand, was upset that I had approved them for media. So
Mhm,
I ran across the convention with our mutual friend Shelley.
mhm.
Shelley at the time was an avid swimmer, and she's a runner again now. And I tried to catch up with her. So we ran from the Hilton through the Marriott into the Hyatt, looking for the
Oh,
perpetrators who had done this. And so I got a little heated, and I pushed the boundaries of professionalism. And I was really loud, and there was definitely a Tony Soprano look on my face. And I feel that I I'm glad I'm basically a nice person. Let's put it that way, and calm myself down. But the entire scene was captured on video, and I was embarrassed, and I thought I was going to get fired from Dragon Con. But while the camera was running and on the floor, um, three Planet of the Apes cosplayers bent over and ruined any really embarrassing video by acting like monkeys, including eating pretend lice off of each other
what
and
did
making faces. So there was nothing. It was kind of, the monkey saved me. That's all I'm saying.
they say?
The monkey saved me. So that's
Thanks to the
the
monkey.
extreme. Now, my most favorite moment came from my first day as a volunteer on the help desk, where a guy walks up with a cane and says, "Can you help me?" And I stand up, because I stood up out of respect, because he's leaning over. I don't want to make it hard for him. And then I see his badge, and his name is David Prowse, and he was the body of Darth Vader in
Oh.
Star Wars. And he goes, "Yes, yes, yes, I'm David. But please, please, can you help me? I'm trying to find my friend Peter Mayhew,
Ah,
who is the body of
you know,
Chewbacca."
Chewbacca.
So my first full day working, I turned into Landau Calrissian and was able to turn Chewbacca over to Darth Vader. And that was great. I mean, I've had lots of great moments. And Lucy Lawless teaching me how to introduce myself, because she wasn't happy with me not being bold enough. She wanted me to be bolder, so she rehearsed it for a while with me. Having Christopher Lloyd come to my party was a highlight I'll never forget. And a few years ago, you may not be aware of this, but I do have mobility issues. So after my surgery a couple of years ago, I made the mistake of, at my party, climbing up on the table, as I did every year, to give my speech. When I was done with the speech, I realized I had not arranged for an extra strategy. So I had no way to get down. And I finally jumped down, and one of the guests there thought that was so cool, he wanted to hang out with me. And there's a lot of guests I think are cool and want to hang out with, but it's very seldom a guest sends somebody to say, "Hey, can you hang on? Christian wants to see." And it's Christian Kane from Leverage and Angel and a number of other shows. All I wanted to talk to him about was Fame
That's
LA.
cool.
So
Wow. That's really cool. Just so for the last like few minutes, I wanted to jump back to what you were talking about, how you originally wanted to get into journalism. And before we were talking, or before we started the live stream, you were talking about some podcast ideas that you had. So you want to share those?
Sure. Yeah, no, I have always assumed from my earliest days, I assumed I would either end up as a priest or minister, or I would end up as a stand-up comedian. Either way, I get a microphone and people have to
The
listen to me for a
platform.
few minutes.
Yeah.
Um, but I used to have a radio show, Seriously Dan, and an associated podcast. Um, but it's been a while since I've done that, and I'm working on an idea, heavily influenced, but not at all a ripoff of How Did That Get Made. I have recently, in the past few years, run into a lot of people who were 60s TV stars, and I've gotten into conversations about shows from the 70s. I remember that younger folks don't know at all. But on the other hand, I've been talking to people my age, and I've mentioned songs, shows that I've watched with my daughter, and they're like, they have no idea what that is. And I realized that you only get to see a certain group of shows during a lifetime. And I wanted to do, let's watch the pilot. And that is, or let's go to the pilot, where we go back to the pilot episode of a show with people who are aware of the show, people who are completely unaware of the show, people who weren't born when the show was on, or people, and it really gelled when one day I was watching on the Roku. I watched the first episode of Just Shoot Me, followed by the first episode of a show I liked a lot called Love and War. And the first episode of Love and War was dreadful. It looked like a high school play in terms of the acting. And these were the female lead had just come from like 5 years on LA Law, and she was dreadful. She got fired. Just want to point that out. And the first episode of Just Shoot Me is so blatantly misogynistic for a show that was about it was supposed to be a feminist breakthrough show. And I'm like, I want to show this to millennials. And then the other one that came up is a show I enjoyed a lot on MTV called Faking It. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's about two girls who go to the prom as lesbians, even though they're not lesbians, so that they can win the prom queen and queen. The problem is one of them actually is a lesbian. Hilarity ensues, and then there's three more seasons about gender confusion, exploring your own sexuality. But it's very funny, and when it goes deep, and when it hurts, it hurts. But it's also funny. So these are shows that a lot of people haven't seen, and I don't know how much appeal it has, but I think it has a great deal of great conversation coming out of it. So I'm looking to launch that after Dragon Con, so in September. And I do have industry professionals lined up to assist me in the discussion.
That sounds really interesting. Yeah, it's a great idea.
I hope. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Dan, for joining me today. This was a lot of fun, great discussion. And I'd love to have you back sometime and talk about Atlanta during the Olympics, because that sounded fascinating to me. And I was like, oh, we just don't have time for that.
Yeah, no, any time. Because another great idea is this. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of your first live stream, which I've only done once, and it was about Game of Thrones. So now I'm talking about myself. So I'm a little self-conscious, but thank you.
Well, it was great. And thank you so much.